a German shepherd, curled tight against the rotting boards of an abandoned porch, his ribs visible through a coat that had lost its shine. His head rested on his paws, unmoving, as if waiting for something or someone that had never come back. The rain slid off his back in thin rivulets, gathering in the hollows of the broken wood beneath him. At first glance he looked lifeless, but then the faintest shiver ran through his frame, a stubborn flicker of survival that refused to leave him, no matter how much the world had turned away. His eyes were open, amber and hollow, holding the weight of nights too long to count. This is where his story begins, and if you stay with me, you will see how an abandoned dog and a child barely old enough to walk found each other in a silence that spoke louder than words. You will see grief turn to loyalty, fear turn to protection, and a bond that no storm could ever wash away. This story will break you and then rebuild you. Like, share, and tell us where in the world you are watching from today. The porch smelled of damp wood and rust. The storm had rolled in overnight, washing the dust from the air, leaving behind the sharp tang of earth turned over by heavy rain. The house itself leaned in on itself like a man who had carried too much weight for too long. Its windows were cracked, some covered by warped boards, some open to the wind. Through one, the faint outline of a curtain hung limp, the fabric stained, from years of weather. The dog did not move when footsteps splashed past on the road. Cars passed, their headlights cutting briefly across the darkened lot, catching the curve of his spine, the way his ears still twitched to every sound, even as the rest of him seemed too tired to rise. He had been waiting. That much was clear. Every so often his head would lift, not fully, but enough to scan the street, enough to search the distance for a figure that never came. Then, as though the weight of absence were heavier than hunger itself, his chin would lower back to the soaked wood, and his breath would settle into shallow, uneven pulls. The rain gathered in his fur until it clung to him like another burden, and yet he stayed, loyal to a place that held nothing left for him. I did not know then what tethered him there. I did not know the losses stitched into his silence, or the memories that pulled him back to that broken porch night after night. But I know this. He should not have survived as long as he did. And still, he did. Somewhere deep inside that hollow frame, there remained the stubborn ember of devotion. The kind only a shepherd carries, the kind that does not break, even when everything else has. The streetlight above hummed, flickering weakly against the storm. Its glow fell across him in fragments, gilding his fur for a heartbeat at a time. Each flicker revealed a different truth. Scars along his muzzle, the cracked leather of a collar that no longer had a name attached, the way his paws curled as if remembering touch. The world had gone quiet around him, the storm steady, the houses dark, and in that silence the shepherd waited for the sound of a voice he would never hear again, waited for the footsteps of someone who would never return, waited until waiting itself became his only reason to keep breathing. That night, no one came for him. But someone else would, not from the road, not from the house, from a place no one could have expected. The first sound was small, a rustle, a scrape of something too soft to be wind, too alive to be rain. He stirred, his ears pulling forward, nostrils flaring. His body tensed, not with aggression, but with recognition that something had entered the air that mattered. His head lifted fully then, for the first time in days. His eyes focused toward the yard. The chain-link fence, bent and sagging, had offered no protection for years. Through its gaps a new sound came, not footsteps, not voices, a tiny breath, a fragile, uncertain exhale that fogged the damp air before vanishing. The shepherd froze, and there, just beyond the broken gate, a small figure moved clumsily forward. Not an adult, not someone searching for him. A baby. Crawling through the wet grass, its little hands sinking into the mud, a soft blanket dragging behind. The rain clung to the child's hair, to its cheeks, but it did not cry. It only moved forward, slow and steady, toward the dog who had been waiting for someone who might finally see him. The shepherd did not move. His breath caught. His heart pressed hard against his ribs. His entire body, worn and hollow as it was, became still with something greater than survival. In that moment, Beneath the flickering light and the steady rain, the shepherd and the child saw each other, and the world, for the first time in a very long time, seemed to hold its breath. The baby's breath fogged the night air, each tiny exhale caught in the glow of the streetlight before it dissolved into the storm. The shepherd's gaze did not waver. He watched as the child pressed one small hand into the grass, then another, pushing forward with the clumsy determination of a soul too young to know fear. The blanket trailing behind was pale blue once, now heavy with rain, its edges darkened by the mud. It snagged against the broken fence before slipping free, dragging another streak across the ground. Still, the child pressed on, silent, eyes wide in the dim light, locked on the figure curled upon the porch. The shepherd did not rise. His body ached with hunger, with dampness, with the weight of days unmoving. But something shifted within him, a thread of instinct that pulled tight, cutting through exhaustion. His ears lifted, his breath sharpened. He was no longer merely enduring the storm, he was listening. The sound of the child's movement, the faint patter of small palms against wet earth, awakened something that had been buried beneath grief. He knew that sound. Not this child, not this fragile new presence before him, but the rhythm of innocence, the heartbeat of something worth guarding. And memory, like a knife turned in an old wound, cut through him. He remembered the smell first, sweet, powdery, mixed with the faint trace of milk that clung to small clothes. He remembered the sound of laughter that bubbled like water over stones, the kind that filled a room without trying. He remembered the warmth of a hand, small, unsteady, buried deep in the thick fur of his neck. But those memories fractured quickly, splintering beneath the weight of silence that followed. The laughter had stopped. The rooms had emptied. The hand had slipped away. He blinked against the rain, forcing the fragments back into the shadows where they belonged. The porch beneath him was not the home he remembered. The child crawling toward him was not the same one he had once known. And yet, something in his chest ached with recognition. The baby reached the first step of the porch, pausing as if sensing the stillness of the figure above. Water pooled on the boards, glimmering in the faint light, reflecting the child's face in broken pieces. Small fingers gripped the edge, testing, pulling, as the shepherd's eyes followed every movement. Still, he did not move. He could not. The hunger in his belly twisted with something sharper than fear, not of the child, but of what it meant to care again, of what it meant to let the silence of his waiting be broken. He had lived in shadow, in absence, and the thought of light felt dangerous. The rain deepened, a steady drumming on the roof above, dripping through cracks in the wood. The air carried the sharp tang of rust from the fence, the sour scent of mildew from the house. Beneath it all, faint but undeniable, was the scent of the child, warm, alive, fragile. The shepherd's nostrils flared, drinking it in. His tail twitched once, a slow, uncertain motion, almost involuntary. His body betrayed the thing his mind resisted. For the first time in days, perhaps weeks, his weight shifted. His paws stretched forward, claws scraping softly against the wood. The child froze as if sensing the change, wide eyes staring up at the massive form above. The shepherd lowered his head, the rain dripping from his muzzle, pooling at the edge of the porch. He inhaled long and quiet, taking in the presence before him as if to memorize it. And then just as quickly he stilled again, because memory rose sharper than ever. He remembered the door that had closed one final time. He remembered the car that drove away without him. He remembered the silence of rooms he had once filled with his own watchful steps, now empty, dust gathering where life had been. And he remembered the sound he had made, low, hollow, a cry swallowed by the night that had gone unanswered. He had waited then, too, waited for a door to open, waited for footsteps to return, waited until the waiting itself had carved him hollow. The baby shifted again, breaking the storm of memory. One tiny hand pressed flat against the first porch step. The child pushed upward, struggling against the wet wood, determined to climb. The sound was so small, so fragile, and yet it broke something inside the shepherd that hunger and rain had never touched. He rose, slowly, joints stiff, muscles trembling from disuse. The German shepherd pulled himself upright. His silhouette filled the frame of the porch, larger than life against the fractured glow of the streetlight. Water streamed from his coat, dripping in dark lines to the boards below. The baby's breath hitched, but there was no cry, no fear, only stillness. The shepherd took one step forward. His paw pressed against the wet wood with a soft thud, his claws catching in the grain. His head lowered again, eyes locked on the child below. The distance between them narrowed, though not yet closed, and in that suspended space, time seemed to pause. The storm carried on, the streetlight flickered, the house loomed behind, a hollow shell of what had once been. But here on the edge of a broken porch, with a child reaching upward and a dog standing guard, the world felt fragile, balanced, as if the slightest movement could tip it toward salvation or ruin. The shepherd did not yet know which. His breath came heavy, misting the air. His chest rose and fell with effort, the rhythm uneven but steady. His eyes searched the child's face, reading something beyond expression, something wordless yet undeniable. It was not the face he remembered. But it was enough. The child pressed upward again, small fingers curling tighter against the wet step. The blanket slipped further into the mud behind, forgotten in the climb. The shepherd's ears twitched forward, his body lowering instinctively, as if preparing not to strike but to catch. And for the first time in so long that even memory could not measure it, he was not waiting for someone to come back. He was waiting for someone to arrive. The rain softened briefly, the storm's fury easing into a steady rhythm. The sound filled. The silence between them, a lullaby of water on wood, of earth drinking deep. The baby's hand slipped once, tiny palm skidding against the slick board. The shepherd's muscles tensed, his weight shifting forward instinctively. The child caught again, pulling upward, determined, and the shepherd stayed, watching, waiting, guarding. The porch, once a place of absence, had become a threshold. On one side, the emptiness of days is lost. On the other, the fragile possibility of something new. The shepherd did not yet step forward, but neither did he turn away. His eyes, once hollow, carried the faintest flicker of light, a spark that even rain could not extinguish, and though he could not name it, though he could not yet trust it, the truth lingered in the silence between them. The waiting was ending. The rain carried on, steady and relentless, tracing thin rivers down the warped planks of the porch. The baby's small body leaned forward again, pushing upward with clumsy strength. The shepherd's paws braced against the wood as if anchoring him in place, the muscles beneath his coat tight with a tension that was not aggression, but something closer to dread. The child climbed, one hand after another, unaware of the silence that surrounded them like a fragile shell. The shepherd bent his head low, eyes following the slow, deliberate ascent. The blanket lay abandoned below, soaking in the mud, but the child pressed upward without looking back. The air smelled of damp wood and rust, of old stains buried beneath the fresh rain. But beneath those scents was something sharper, something the shepherd could not mistake, the warmth of life, the faint trace of skin, milk, and safety. A scent he had once known as intimately as his own. The memory rose unbidden. He had lain once beneath a crib, ears pressed forward, paws stretched out, tail curled around his side. He remembered the glow of a nightlight on pale walls, the soft hum of lullabies played on a machine that never quite kept rhythm. Above him, the small breaths of a child had filled the air, steady, unbroken, pure. Each sound had been his to guard, each shift, each whimper, each laugh in the dark of night. And in those days he had not merely existed, he had belonged. The shepherd blinked hard, pulling himself back to the present. The storm was real. The child before him was not the same one whose scent haunted his memory, but the fracture between then and now ached, as if the two were bound by something unseen. The baby slipped again, tiny hand sliding on the wet wood, and the shepherd's heart clenched with instinct. He lowered his body closer, paws spreading wide as though ready to catch what must not fall. The child steadied, pressing upward once more, and the dog's breath released in a heavy, shuddered exhale. It was not the fall that frightened him. It was the return of memory. He had guarded it once before, and he had failed. The images came. in shards jagged and incomplete. A door slammed too hard, raised voices sharp and final. The shepherd remembered pacing the length of a hallway, nails clicking on tile, his ears pinned back at the tone of arguments he could not understand. He remembered pressing his nose to a door that would not open, the smell of tears leaking through, the crack beneath. He had whined then low, insistent, until the silence that followed had frightened him more than the shouting ever had. Later there was a car ride. He remembered the way the child had cried, strapped in the back seat, while the shepherd pressed his head against the window, confused by the shifting sense of unfamiliar streets. The car had stopped, the doors opened, and the world had changed. He remembered hands pulling him away. He remembered the leash tightening, the collar straining. He remembered his paws dragging against pavement as the car door shut, and the child's voice muffled by glass reaching out for him, and then silence. The shepherd's body trembled on the porch, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest, not at the child before him, but at the ghosts clawing at the edges of memory. His ears flattened, his eyes squeezed shut against the weight of it. But when he opened them again, the storm had not taken the child away. The baby was still there, pressing upward, steady and certain, as though nothing in the world could stop the climb. And the shepherd, despite the pain etched into every memory, could not turn away. He lowered his head until his nose touched the wet wood just inches from the child's hand. The scent filled him with pure, new fragile. It was not the same, but it was enough to stir the part of him that had refused to die, even when everything else had been stripped away. The child reached the porch at last. With a final push, small fingers gripping the edge, the baby hauled forward onto the wet boards. The shepherd took one step back, giving space, but his eyes never left the tiny figure crawling now toward him. The rain eased, softened to a mist. The air thickened with the smell of earth and wood, of something beginning again. The child's hand pressed against the shepherd's paw, small and soft against claws dulled by time and neglect. The shepherd did not move. He only watched, the weight of touch flooding through him like fire on frozen ground. It had been so long since he had been touched without force, without demand, without loss. The child's hand lingered, fingers curling instinctively into the damp fur between his toes. The shepherd's breath caught, his chest tightening, with something he could not name. His tail, stiff and motionless for days, shifted once against the boards. The world around them remained broken, the house, the porch, the storm. But here in the center of it something fragile stirred. The shepherd lowered his head further, muzzle brushing the child's hair, damp strands clinging to his nose. The scent filled him again, anchoring him, grounding him, and in that moment the fractures of memory did not vanish, but they softened. The door that had closed, the car that had driven away, the silence that had followed, they remained. But beneath them rose something else, not the past, not yet the future, only the possibility of a bond that might hold. The baby pressed closer, small body leaning against his foreleg. The shepherd's breath grew steady, the rhythm evening out, as though the presence beside him had quieted something long untamed. He knew nothing of why the child had come, of how it had found its way through the fence, across the mud, up the broken steps, but he knew this: he would not let this one slip away. The rain slowed to a drizzle, the storm retreating at last. A faint glow spread across the horizon, not yet dawn, but the whisper of it. The shepherd lifted his head, eyes scanning the empty street, ears turning toward every sound. He had learned to expect absence, to prepare for loss. But tonight, he was not alone. The child shifted, curling into the damp warmth of his body, small breath fogging the shepherd's fur. The night held them both in its fragile silence, broken only by the steady rhythm of rain easing into earth. And for the first time since memory had become a wound, the shepherd closed his eyes without fear. The rain had thinned to a whisper, the storm giving way to a softer hush that clung to the air like a secret. The porch boards, slick and dark, held the weight of two figures pressed close together, the German shepherd, ribs sharp beneath his soaked coat, and the child, small and fragile, curled against the warmth of his leg, as if it had always been meant to be there. The street beyond was empty. Houses leaned into the darkness, their windows blind, their roofs dripping with the remnants of the storm. Somewhere, far off, a car passed, its tires slicing through wet asphalt, but it did not slow. The world carried on, unaware of the moment unfolding in silence. The shepherd lay still, his body taut with the tension of instinct. He did not sleep, though. His eyes closed at times, his ears forever turning toward the slightest sound. Each shift of the baby's small breath against his side, each tiny exhale that fogged in the night air, drew his attention as surely as a call. And in that rhythm, inhale, exhale, inhale, something long dormant began to settle inside him. He remembered again the nights of watching over another crib, another child. The memories came in fragments, like light through shattered glass. The faint creak of floorboards as he paced a hallway. The weight of a small blanket draped across his back by hands, too small to know kindness from play. The way the world had seemed safe, complete, when his duty had been clear. Then came the fracture. Silence where laughter had been, the sharp closing of doors, the leash that pulled him away. He shook his head gently, droplets scattering from his ears. The present pulled him back. The warmth pressed against him. Fragile and real. The baby stirred. A soft, clumsy motion, arms shifting, legs curling. The shepherd's eyes opened instantly, glowing faintly amber in the weak light of the street lamp. The child's hand slipped from his paw, dragging across the wet boards, then returned, finding the same patch of damp fur as though drawn there by instinct. The shepherd lowered his head, his muzzle brushing the child's fingers. The touch was feather-light, hesitant, but the child did not pull back. Instead, the hand pressed more firmly, palm resting against his paw as if to claim it. No words passed between them. There was none to give, only the silence and the soft exchange of breath and warmth. The shepherd's tail shifted once, slow, brushing against the boards. It was not joy, not yet. It was an acknowledgement. The hours crept forward, the storm's remnants dripping from the roof in a steady cadence. The night was long, but the shepherd did not move from his place. Hunger gnawed at him, thirst burned his throat, but he stayed. The child had chosen his side, and that was enough. When the air began to pale, the faintest hint of dawn brushing the horizon, the shepherd lifted his head. The world around them revealed itself slowly. The broken fence, the sagging porch, the stretch of empty road glistening from the night's rain. The light touched the child's face, softening the damp strands of hair pressed to its cheek, casting shadows beneath its eyes. The shepherd studied that face as if memorizing it. The baby stirred again, small body shifting closer into his fur. The shepherd's muscles tensed, then relaxed, his body adjusting to shield against the morning chill. He angled himself so that his flank pressed against the child, warmth spreading from his body to the fragile form beside him. It was instinct. It was a memory. It was something deeper still. For so long, he had guarded emptiness, doors that did not open, windows that looked out of silence, rooms filled with dust instead of laughter. Now here was my breath. Wait. Touch. The shepherd lowered his head again, resting it on his paws. His ears remained alert, but his eyes softened. The child's presence was not a ghost, not a fragment. It was real. And slowly, quietly, he began to trust it. The street awoke with the faint signs of morning. Somewhere a bird shook droplets from its wings, releasing a tentative call into the pale air. A shutter creaked open 2 houses down. The hum of life returned, hesitant as though unsure it belonged here. The shepherd did not move. His body was a barrier, his eyes fixed on the street. His thoughts wandered backward and forward, caught between what had been lost and what now rested against him. He remembered the sound of footsteps, small ones that had followed him down hallways, hands that had tugged at his ears with clumsy affection. He remembered the pride in belonging, in being more than a stray shadow at the edge of life. And he remembered losing it all. The child beside him shifted once more, a faint whimper rising in its throat. The shepherd pressed his muzzle closer, a low breath escaping as though to soothe. The sound faded. The child stilled again. It was enough. As morning grew stronger, the world seemed to notice them at last. A door slammed somewhere in the distance. A voice called out. Tires rolled across wet pavement. The shepherd stiffened, his head rising, ears sharp. His body curved instinctively around the child, shielding it from view. The porch boards groaned softly beneath his weight. His breath deepened, steady but watchful. No one came. The noises passed, leaving them untouched. But the moment carved itself into his mind. The world was waking, and the silence they had shared would not last forever. He turned his eyes downward again, to the fragile figure pressed against him. The child had not stirred at the noise. Small fingers still clutched his fur, trusting without question. The shepherd lowered his head once more, his chest tightening with a vow unspoken but absolute. Whatever the day brought, he would not let harm reach this one. The sun climbed higher, though its warmth barely pierced the damp air. The porch remained. Their refuge, the broken boards their ground. Time moved differently here, slow, fragile, as though measured only by the rise and fall of the child's breath. The shepherd's hunger sharpened, but he did not leave. He had lived with hunger, he had survived worse. What mattered was the weight against his side, the fragile trust pressed into his fur. He remembered again the leash that had pulled him. Away! The car door that had closed, the silence that had followed. He remembered the child he could not protect, the voice he could not reach. And yet, here another child had come to him, not with words, not with reason, but with the simple act of crawling through rain and mud to find him. The shepherd could not understand why, but he could understand this: he would not fail again. The vow settled into him, heavier than hunger, deeper than memory. His body shifted, pressing closer, shielding more fully. The child breathed softly, unaware of the silent promises etched into the morning air. The shepherd closed his eyes, listening to the world awaken, guarding what had been placed perhaps by chance, perhaps by fate into his care. And as the light grew stronger, a new silence took hold. Not the silence of absence, not the silence of loss, but the silence of belonging. The storm had washed the world raw, leaving the air sharp and clean, though heavy with the scent of wet earth and splintered wood. The German shepherd lay stretched across the porch, his body forming a wall between the child and the waking street. His coat was still damp, but the sun that edged slowly into the sky traced faint warmth across his back. The child shifted against him, small breaths unbroken, fingers curled into the thick fur at his leg. It was not sleep in the way adults knew it, deep, distant, but rather the light rest of a being who trusted the ground beneath it, who trusted the warmth pressed close. And that, more than anything, unsettled the shepherd. Trust. It was a fragile thing, and he had seen it broken. He had felt it torn from him piece by piece until nothing remained but hunger and silence. Yet here it was again, wordless, unearned, given freely by a child too young to know the weight of it. The shepherd shifted, his body adjusting to shield against the morning breeze. His tail curled closer, brushing against the child's foot. The motion stirred the baby, who stretched clumsily, arms flung wide, legs pressing against the damp boards. One small fist tightened in his fur before loosening again. The shepherd froze at the touch, not out of fear, but of memory. Hands had rested there once before. Small hands, clumsy, searching. He remembered the pull on his ears, the way laughter had spilled out in response to his low grumble. He remembered lying at the foot of a crib, every sense tuned to the rise and fall of tiny breaths. He had been a guardian then, a constant, a presence so steady he had believed it unbreakable. But it had broken. The shepherd lowered his head, pressing his nose gently to the child's hair. The scent was different, new, unfamiliar, but it carried the same innocence, the same fragile weight. His chest tightened with something between grief and resolve. He would not let this one slip away. The morning thickened. Shadows drew back, revealing the street in full. Cars began to pass, one by one, their tires hissing against damp pavement. A door opened somewhere nearby. A voice called out, the clatter of routine life resuming. The shepherd's ears sharpened at every sound. His body stiffened when footsteps echoed too near. Yet no one came to the porch. No one turned toward the sagging fence or the child now pressed against him. They remained unseen. The shepherd lowered his head again, eyes narrowing against the rising light. He had lived unseen for so long that it no longer surprised him. But the child, how had no one noticed? How had it slipped free, crawled through mud and storm to reach him here? The questions gnawed at him, but the answers did not come. The child stirred again, eyes fluttering open this time, wide, unfocused, still heavy with the softness of sleep. The gaze lifted upward, locking on the shepherd's face. There was no fear, only quiet wonder, as if the dog were not a stranger at all, but something already known. The baby reached again, hand brushing his muzzle. The shepherd did not flinch. He let the touch rest, there warm against the damp fur of his nose. His breath fogged softly against the child's skin, and the baby exhaled in return, the two rhythms blending into a fragile duet. For the first time, the shepherd's tail thumped once against the boards, a small sound barely audible, but enough to shift the air. The child's lips parted, as if to form a sound, but none came. Only a quiet hum, a murmur too soft to name. And then the hand fell again, resting against the shepherd's chest. It was not language, not in the way humans knew it, but it was a conversation all the same. The shepherd answered in silence, in presence, in the steady beat of his breath. As the day grew, light filled the broken house behind them. Through a gap in the boards, a shaft of sun touched the warped floor inside, illuminating dust that swirled lazily in the air. The house smelled of mold, of old wood and damp rot. It had been abandoned long enough to forget its purpose. The shepherd's gaze lingered on it, as though it held the shape of memories he could not quite name. Perhaps he had passed through doors like those once, climbed stairs like those, followed laughter down hallways that no longer stood. But this place was no home. It was only a shelter, a ruin, a stage upon which waiting had stretched too long. Still, it was here that the child had found him, and so for now it became enough. The street grew louder. The shepherd's ears flicked. With each sound, doors slamming, engines coughing to life, voices calling across yards. The world was awake, and the fragile quiet they had shared through the night began to thin. The shepherd rose slowly, careful not to disturb the child who now sat leaning clumsily against his leg. His body blocked the view of the street, his stance protective. His hunger burned sharper now, his throat dry with thirst, but he would not move far. The baby shifted again, unsteady, one small hand gripping the coarse fur at his side for balance. The shepherd glanced down, ears turning, but did not step away. The child leaned forward, pressing closer, the small weight anchoring him. It was not possession, it was not claimed, it was trust. And the shepherd, though hollowed by loss, could not deny it. Hours passed in fragments. The light grew stronger, shadows shorter. The shepherd stood and lay again, his body adjusting, but always near, always close enough that the child's touch could reach him. At one point, the baby crawled a few inches forward, toward the edge of the porch. The shepherd's body moved instantly, blocking the path, guiding the small figure back with a gentle press of his muzzle. The child laughed, a soft, breathy sound, more exhale than voice, but it lingered in the air like sunlight. The shepherd froze at the sound. It was not the same laugh. It was higher, smaller, unshaped by age, yet it struck him with the same force, pulling memory forward until it stung. He closed his eyes briefly, swallowing the ache before opening them again to the present. The child laughed once more, hand patting clumsily against his shoulder. The sound echoed across the empty street, unnoticed by the world, but enough to shatter the silence he had carried for so long. Something inside him shifted, not healed, not yet, but loosened, as if a knot had been tugged open. By midday, the sun hung high, though its warmth was muted by the dampness left behind. The shepherd rose again, pacing the edge of the porch, ears tuned to the movements around them. The child followed clumsily on hands and knees, always near, always returning to his side. It was no longer waiting. It was companionship. And though hunger and thirst pressed sharp against him, though his body trembled with fatigue, the shepherd stood taller than he had in days, his head lifted, his eyes clearer, his steps steadier. The child had not spoken a word, yet the silence between them carried more weight than language ever could. And the shepherd, for the first time in so long he could not measure, allowed himself to believe. The sun arced higher, steady and indifferent, spilling light across the broken fence and the leaning porch. The German shepherd stood watchful, his chest rising in measured rhythm, while the child traced small circles on the boards with curious hands. The hours stretched, but for the first time in so long the waiting no longer felt like decay. It felt like purpose. The shepherd's gaze lingered on the street. Life moved there, neighbors stepping into cars, a postman crossing the far sidewalk, voices trailing from open windows. Yet none of them turned their eyes toward the ruined house. None noticed the figure of the child leaning against him, nor the silent vow that had taken root between them. Perhaps it was better this way. The shepherd did not know. He only knew the weight of presence, the fragile thread binding him to this small life that now refused to leave his side. As the afternoon pressed forward, hunger gnawed more insistently. His body carried the memory of meals long past, scraps found, stolen, begged for, but those memories could not fill the emptiness inside him. Still, he did not stray. The child needed him more than his body needed food, and so he stayed. The baby, too, showed signs of want. Restlessness crept into its movements. Tiny fists rubbed against my eyes. A soft whimper escaped, not a cry, not yet, but a sound of discomfort. The shepherd leaned closer, brushing his nose against the child's hair, the vibration of his low growl steadying the silence. The sound quieted the restlessness. It was a promise, unspoken, unbreakable. By late afternoon, the shadows began to stretch long across the ground. The world softened, painted in amber tones, and the dampness left by the storm began to lift. It was then the child made its first attempt at movement beyond the boards of the porch. A crawl forward, clumsy and determined. The shepherd rose instantly, his body blocking the path, his head lowered. The child paused, looking up, wide eyes locking on him. A silent question lingered there, not fear, not defiance, but curiosity. The shepherd nudged gently, guiding the child back. But this time the baby resisted. Another forward push, another reach of small hands. The shepherd blocked again, more firmly this time, his paw resting against the boards as a barrier. The child huffed a sound between protest and determination. For a moment the shepherd's gaze softened. He saw in that insistence something he recognized: persistence, the refusal to remain where the world had placed you. He had lived it, carried it, survived by it, and now he saw it mirrored, small and unformed, in the child before him. The shepherd stepped aside, just enough, his stance shifting from blockade to guide. The child crawled forward again, this time met not with resistance, but with a careful shadow at its side. Together they left the porch. The yard was wild with weeds, damp soil still clinging to the storm. The child's hands pressed into mud, leaving small impressions, while the shepherd's paws cut deeper marks beside them. Step for step, movement for movement, the two figures advanced across the uneven ground. The shepherd's ears twitched constantly, scanning the street, the fences, the air. Each sound sharpened him, each shadow measured. Yet his gaze returned always to the child, to the fragile form pressing forward despite the uneven ground. It was not an escape. It was not exploration. It was the beginning. They reached the edge of the yard where the fence had collapsed, opening a narrow path to the street beyond. The shepherd stopped, body tense, ears pricked. Cars passed at irregular intervals, their tires hissing against wet asphalt. The scent of oil and dust hung heavy. The child paused, sitting back clumsily, eyes fixed on the movement beyond. The shepherd stepped forward, blocking the gap, his stance wide and firm. He would not allow the child into that current of danger. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But as the baby pressed a hand to his leg, steadying itself, the shepherd understood something deeper. The world outside would come, whether he allowed it or not. And when it did, he would have to stand between it and this fragile life. They remained there until the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in fractured colors of gold bleeding into crimson, shadows stretching long and uncertain. The baby leaned against him, weary now, eyes half-lidded. The shepherd remained upright, still a sentinel carved in living form. The sound of voices drifted closer, Two figures walked down the far side of the street, their conversation carrying in fragments. Laughter, low and fleeting, then silence again. The shepherd stiffened. His body angled to shield the child, eyes narrowing, ears tuned to every step. But the figures passed, their eyes forward, their attention elsewhere. Unseen again. The shepherd's chest loosened slightly, though the vigilance did not fade. As the sky dimmed, the child grew heavy with sleep. Its small body slumped against him, breaths evening into soft rhythm. The shepherd lay once more on the ground, curling close, his warmth enveloping the fragile form. Night crept in quietly, the street lamps flickering one by one into dull glow. Shadows thickened, pressing closer, but the shepherd's presence remained solid, immovable. The day had carried them from porch to yard, from silence to movement. Tomorrow, perhaps, would carry them farther still. For now, there was only this trust shared in the dark and the quiet vow of a guardian who had once lost everything, now choosing not to lose again. The night deepened. A distant howl cut through the quiet, another dog, far off, voice carried on the wind. The shepherd lifted his head, ears turning. The sound stirred something primal within him, a reminder of a world larger than this broken house and fragile child. But he did not answer. He lowered his head once more, pressing his nose gently against the baby's hair. The only sound he allowed was the steady rhythm of his own breath, a lullaby of presence against the silence. And in that silence, a bond rooted deeper, not yet tested, not yet understood, but real. As the stars traced faint patterns overhead, the shepherd closed, his eyes not in rest, not fully but in surrender to the moment. He had been a shadow, forgotten, unseen. Now, in the company of a child who asked for nothing but trust, he had become something more. And though the road ahead was hidden, uncertain, filled with dangers both known and waiting, he would walk it, not alone. The night had wrapped them in silence, but dawn arrived with a slow unraveling. Light spilled across the yard, filling the cracks in the fence, catching on the weeds that bent under dew. The German shepherd lifted his head before the baby stirred, instinct guiding him to greet the world first, to weigh its intentions before allowing it near. The child lay curled against him, breath soft, fingers still resting in the fur at his chest. For a moment the shepherd remained still, eyes on the shifting glow of morning, ears turning at every subtle sound, the buzz of insects, the distant roll of a garbage truck, the faint call of a bird that had survived the storm. Then softly the baby moved, a yawn, tiny and unformed, followed by the flutter of eyelids opening to greet the pale sky. The shepherd nudged gently, grounding the fragile form back to the world. Another day had begun. This morning felt different. The street carried more motion. People passed, quicker than before, drawn by routines that pulled them from doorways and into cars. The shepherd watched them all from the broken fence. He had no illusions if their eyes lingered too long, if their curiosity sharpened. Everything could change. Until now, he and the child had existed in the blurred edges of sight, perhaps hidden by neglect, perhaps ignored by choice. But shadows do not remain unnoticed forever, and as the morning pressed forward, the shepherd sensed the shift. The first sign came with a woman walking her dog along the far sidewalk. Her pace slowed as her gaze flickered across the broken fence. She saw the shepherd's form first, dark and solid, ears pricked and unwavering. Her own dog, small and quick-footed, strained at the leash, barking sharp notes into the morning air. The shepherd did not move. He remained carved in silence, his presence alone enough to mark the boundary. The woman hesitated, eyes narrowing. For the briefest moment her gaze dropped lower to the child seated against the shepherd's side, hands clutching his fur, wide eyes peeking through the fence. Gap. The woman's step faltered, her lips parted, breath caught as if to speak. But then she moved on, tugging her dog sharply, her pace quickening. Perhaps fear drove her away, perhaps disbelief silenced her. Either way, the shepherd's world remained intact. For now. The second sign came later, when the mail truck rolled down the street. Its brakes hissed, echoing too loud in the still morning. The driver stepped out, his bag slung over one shoulder, his eyes sweeping lazily across the houses as he worked. His route, until they landed on the shepherd. A pause. Not long, not sharp, but enough. The shepherd stood steady, his body angled slightly forward, his gaze unyielding. The man frowned, lips tightening, before dropping the mail into a rusted box nearby. His eyes flickered back once more, just enough to catch the child's movement. The small hand pressing against the shepherd's leg, the tilt of a head resting into thick fur. The man's brows furrowed, confusion etched deep. He lingered, weight shifting, as though torn between action and retreat. But then he shook his head, muttering something low, dismissing what he thought he saw. Perhaps it was easier that way. He climbed back into his truck, the engine grumbling as it pulled away. But the shepherd knew. A seed of awareness had been planted. As the day wore on, the sense of being watched lingered. The shepherd remained tense, ears twitching at every sound, his eyes scanning for the shift between ordinary motion and dangerous interest. The child, meanwhile, grew bolder. Each hour brought new attempts at movement, crawling through the grass, tugging at weeds, pressing tiny fingers into the earth as though to test its boundaries. And each time, the shepherd followed, never a step behind, his shadow covering the fragile exploration. But even in his vigilance, he could not ignore the truth. The world was beginning to notice. The fragile anonymity that had protected them was cracking. Afternoon came with heavier heat, the storm's memory evaporating into a haze. The shepherd guided the child back beneath the porch shade, resting once more in the cool shadows. But his body remained alert, his mind circling the same silent question. What happens when they are seen not as shadows, but as something undeniable? It was in this question that the third sign arrived. A pair of children walked down the sidewalk, school bags slung carelessly, voices rising and falling in laughter. Their steps slowed as they neared the fence, eyes catching on the figure of the shepherd. They stopped. One pointed, whispering something sharp. The other leaned forward, squinting, gaze darting between the dog and the fragile form of the baby nestled against him. Their laughter stilled, replaced with hushed tones. The shepherd rose, his form towering, eyes narrowing with quiet warning. His presence alone carried weight, enough to send the children stumbling back, their whispers scattering. But before, they fled. One lingered a moment longer, eyes locked on the child. Confusion painted their face, confusion and something else. Recognition, perhaps. Then they turned and ran, voices fading down the street. The shepherd's heart beat steady, but a deeper unease crept into his chest. The silence that had sheltered them was breaking. Evening came slowly, drawn in colors of molten gold and deepening blue. The shepherd lay once more on the porch, the baby curled into his side, breath slowing into sleep. Yet he did not rest. The day had shown him a truth he could no longer ignore, others now knew. And knowledge, once planted, does not vanish. It grows. He lifted his gaze toward the street, toward the world beyond the broken fence. The faint hum of a distant car, the echo of laughter carried on cooling air, the sharp cry of a bird returning to roost, all of it pressed closer now, no longer distant, no longer ignorable. The shepherd lowered his head, pressing his nose into the child's hair, inhaling deeply. The familiar scent calmed him, grounding him, reminding him of the vow woven in silence between them. Whatever the world saw, whatever it decided, his place was here, not as a shadow, not as stray, but as a shield. The stars would rise soon, and with them perhaps another day of being overlooked, or perhaps the moment when silence would shatter completely. The shepherd did not know which awaited them, but he would be ready, always. When morning came, it carried not just the golden wash of sunlight, but also a strange tension that lingered in the air. The world beyond the fence was no longer blind. The whispers that had begun yesterday, flickers of glances, startled gasps, confused murmurs, had left their trace on the air. The shepherd rose with the dawn, stretching, then circling back to the baby curled tight in the hollow of his body. The child stirred, restless, before opening eyes still heavy with sleep. The shepherd lowered his muzzle, brushing the small cheek. With a tenderness no storm, no hunger, no watchful eyes could erode. Yet even as he comforted, his ears flicked toward the street. The world had begun to lean closer. By mid-morning, the first sign arrived. The same woman who had walked her small dog the day before passed again. Her pace was slower this time, her gaze more deliberate. Yesterday she had hurried on, perhaps convincing herself she had seen nothing unusual. But today, she stopped. The shepherd stood at once, body taut, eyes narrowed but calm. His presence was warning enough. Approach no further. The woman froze, clutching her dog to her chest, her eyes fixed not on him but on the baby. For a moment her expression flickered, between shock and pity, like someone staring at a sight they could neither deny nor fully process. Her lips parted, and words almost formed. But then, as quickly as she had stopped, she turned, walking briskly down the sidewalk, her small dog yapping in protest. The shepherd tracked her until she disappeared from sight. His unease deepened. It was not fear that unsettled him, it was the knowing. The look in her eyes had changed. Yesterday she doubted herself. Today she believed. And belief spreads. The baby grew louder that day. His babbling rose and fell like little melodies, unafraid of being heard. He pressed tiny palms against the shepherd's chest, tugged at his ears, pulled himself clumsily along the boards of the porch. The shepherd followed each movement as he always had, but the urgency was different now. Every sound the child made felt like an invitation to the world outside the fence, a signal calling attention, and attention was dangerous. By noon, another came. An older man, tall and bent at the shoulders, shuffled down the street. His steps were slow, deliberate, and his gaze scanned lazily ahead until it caught the shepherd's still figure by the fence. He stopped. The pause was longer this time, his eyes narrowed, focusing through the broken slats. He saw the child, there was no doubt, his mouth pressed into a thin line, his hands tightening around the cane he carried. Unlike the others, he didn't turn away quickly. Instead, he lingered, watching, weighing. The shepherd shifted forward, his chest low, his stance balanced not aggression, but warning. A silent message. This child is not yours to claim. The man's jaw tightened. His gaze lingered another heartbeat longer before he moved on, his cane tapping slow against the pavement. But the shepherd knew. That hesitation carried weight. Something had taken root. The afternoon stretched heavy, filled with an unease that even the baby seemed to sense. His playful babbling dimmed, his movements slower, his body pressed more often into the safety of the shepherd's side. And as shadows lengthened, the shepherd realized the truth. They were no longer hidden. They were being watched. The next test came when the children from the previous day returned. 2 of them, this time bolder. Their laughter was sharp, echoing, against the pavement as they approached the fence again. The shepherd rose immediately, body a wall between the baby and their eyes. They stopped, whispered, pointed. The taller one leaned close to the fence, squinting through the gaps. He saw the child, and there was no mistaking it now. His breath caught audibly, his face shifting from curiosity to astonishment. "See?" he hissed to the other. The smaller child frowned, tugging his arm nervously. "Let's go." But the taller one lingered, fascination holding him in place. His eyes flicked from the baby to the shepherd, disbelief battling fear. The shepherd stepped closer, his silent authority filling the gap. His chest rumbled with a low growl, not loud, but... "Enough!" The boys startled, stumbling back. The taller one muttered something under his breath before both turned and ran, their footsteps fading fast. The shepherd remained still, but inside, unease pressed deeper. Children talk. Their whispers spread fastest. By dusk, half the street might know. As evening settled, the shepherd guided the baby into the familiar hollow beneath the porch. The child nestled close, small fingers gripping fur as sleep began to pull him under. The shepherd rested his head low, his eyes fixed on the street beyond. The air carried new scents. More footsteps, more lingering pauses, more voices hushed too quickly when they reached the fence. The world outside was circling closer, curiosity sharpening into something heavier. Still, the shepherd did not waver. His vow remained carved into every muscle, every breath, every beat of his heart. No matter what came, whether whispers, questions, or hands reaching through the fence, he would not yield. The child's safety was not negotiable, but that night, as the stars bloomed overhead, the shepherd felt the shift deepen. The world beyond the fence was no longer a blur of shadows passing by. It was awake, aware, and awareness, once born, does not sleep again. He pressed his nose gently to the baby's hair, grounding himself in the small, steady rhythm of breath. The storm had once tested them with rain and thunder. Now a new storm was gathering, one made not of nature's wrath, but of human eyes, human voices, human choices. The shepherd knew it was coming, and he would be ready always. It came with voices, faint, muffled at first, drifting through the damp air like threads of smoke. The shepherd's ears flicked awake long before the child stirred. His head lifted, eyes narrowing as he caught the rhythm of words from beyond the fence. Not the casual hum of neighbors passing, not idle chatter. These were voices planted, paused, lingering, watching. The shepherd rose soundlessly, moving with practiced precision so as not to disturb the baby's fragile rest. He placed himself in the familiar position between the hollow where the child slept and the world that pressed in from beyond the slats. Outside, shadows gathered, 3 figures this time. 2 women, their heads inclined close as they whispered, eyes darting nervously toward the fence. Between them a man stood with arms crossed, his stare fixed and unblinking. His face did not soften with doubt or pity, it hardened with something sharper. The shepherd stood tall, silent. The man's eyes flicked, narrowing as they adjusted, to the dim gaps in the boards. His lips pressed tight, as though words wanted to form but caught in the uncertainty of proof. He leaned, only slightly, before one of the women touched his arm, whispering quick and low. A decision was forming. The shepherd could sense it, and decisions were more dangerous than whispers. The baby stirred, his small body shifting against the shepherd's side. A soft sound escaped his lips, half sigh, half whimper. Instantly, one of the women gasped. The man's expression sharpened, his stance stiffening with certainty. The shepherd lowered his head, nose brushing the child's cheek, calming him back into sleep. The sound faded, but it was too late. They had heard. The group lingered for another breath, their gazes heavy through the fence. Then, as if a silent agreement had been reached, they turned. Their footsteps faded, but their absence carried no relief. It carried weight, the kind of weight that precedes action. The shepherd's instincts sharpened. The fragile balance of silence and secrecy was broken. The neighborhood was no longer blind. The unseen circle of eyes had widened, voices branching like roots into soil, spreading in directions he could not track. He stayed alert the rest of the morning, his body never fully at ease, even when the baby played at tugging his ears or curling against his paws. Every laugh, every soft babble, was met with the shepherd's gaze snapping to the street, his ears tilting toward unseen listeners. By midday, the tension deepened. Another figure approached, not by chance, not in passing. A young woman different from the others. She carried no dog, no groceries, no distraction. Her path led directly to the fence. She stopped close, too close. The shepherd rose at once, his frame filling the gap, his presence heavy with silent warning. But the woman did not flinch. She crouched low, pressing her face nearer to the slats, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hello." The word was soft, tremulous, yet deliberate, not idle curiosity. A call. The baby stirred at the sound. His small body turned, head lifting, eyes blinking wide and bright. For a heartbeat, their gazes met a child and a stranger. The shepherd moved instantly, stepping forward until his body broke their line of sight. His growl was low, controlled, a quiet rumble that filled the air with its warning. The woman gasped softly, her hand rising to her mouth. Fear did not linger long in her face, a flicker of determination, shadowed by conflict. She whispered again, softer now. "You're protecting him, aren't you?" The shepherd stilled. His growl subsided into silence, though his eyes did not soften. He held her gaze with the weight of a vow carved too deep to bend. The woman lingered another breath, then drew back. She straightened slowly, her expression unreadable, before she turned and walked away. The shepherd watched her until she vanished from sight. Something about her presence lingered. She had not looked away in fear, nor left in dismissal. She had left with thought, with intent. And intent was the seed of interference. The rest of the day unfolded in fragments. Passing figures slowed, their steps, heads tilted. Conversations hushed too quickly when the shepherd's eyes turned toward them. What had once been ordinary street noise was now a low hum of suspicion. The shepherd felt it in every bone. The fence that had once shielded them was no longer a barrier. It had become a boundary the world was circling, pressing against, measuring with its collective gaze. The baby, unaware of the shifting tide, played in the patch of sunlight that broke through the porch. He clapped small hands, babbling at nothing, laughing at shadows. The innocence of his joy only deepened the shepherd's resolve. But as evening approached, unease grew sharper. The air shifted. Footsteps came heavier. And then another sound. Not the hushed voices of neighbors, not the careless laughter of children. A knock, soft, deliberate, on the gate. The shepherd froze, muscles coiled, eyes locked on the weathered boards that shuddered faintly at the touch. The baby startled, his laughter breaking into silence, his eyes turning toward the sound. Another knock, louder this time. The shepherd stepped forward, pressing his body against the gate, his growl rising into the stillness of the evening. The sound was deep, resonant, carrying not just warning but promise. Beyond the board's silence, a pause, then a voice. "We know he's in there." The words were quiet, almost uncertain, but they carried the weight of conviction. The baby whimpered softly, his small hands clutching at the shepherd's fur. The shepherd did not move, did not blink. His growl deepened, a low thunder vibrating against the gate. For a long moment, no answer came. Then the footsteps receded. Slow, deliberate, but not defeated. The knock was not a question. It was a declaration, and declarations never come alone. Night fell heavily. The shepherd curled protectively around the baby, his eyes never closing, his ears tuned to every sound that crossed the street. The world beyond the fence no longer felt distant. It pressed close, circling, waiting. The storm that had once been only whispers was now a gathering of eyes, and soon those eyes would demand more than watching. The shepherd lowered his head to the child's hair, the vow unbroken in his silent heart. Whatever storm was coming, he would not yield. The baby was his, and nothing, no whisper, no knock, no reaching hand would take him away. Not because the hours stretched, but because the weight of silence pressed harder. The shepherd did not sleep. His body was still, but his ears remained alive, twitching, angling, carving meaning from every creak, every restless sigh of the street beyond the fence. The baby shifted in his arms of fur and muscle, sighing soft against the hush. Each breath from the child was a rhythm, an anchor. In that rhythm the shepherd found resolve, but even resolve carried strain. The knock had changed everything. The sound of it still echoed in the shepherd's bones, too certain, too deliberate to fade. Like idle curiosity, someone had crossed from watching to acting, and once crossed there was no return. By morning the street was no longer passive. The shepherd felt it before he saw the subtle pressure of presence, feet stopping instead of passing, voices carried in careful tones. When light broke fully, the truth showed itself. Groups now gathered, in twos and threes, not close to the gate but near enough. Their shapes punctuated the street corners, leaning against fences, pausing at lamp-posts, lingering at doorways. Their eyes did not wander. They stayed fixed on the fence. The baby, unknowing, woke with soft laughter, clapping tiny hands against the shepherd's flank. The sound rang out pure and fragile, spilling into the morning air. And the shepherd saw the tilt of heads, the stiffening of postures, the ripple of awareness through the watching crowd. There was no more doubt in their eyes. There was knowing. The shepherd rose to his paws. His presence loomed tall, chest broad, gaze fixed. His stance was not feral, not reckless. It was deliberate. It was a command. For a moment, the watching. Figures hesitated. Their voices dimmed, their movements stalled. A silence stretched, heavy with the weight of decision. Then one man stepped forward. He did not cross the fence, but he placed himself boldly in the open, where all could see. His voice, loud and sure, broke the hush. "This isn't right." The words were not shouted in anger, but delivered with a conviction that carried farther than volume. Murmurs rose, weaving through the small groups. Agreement, uncertainty, conflict. The shepherd did not move. His growl did not rise. He held, his silence like a blade. Through the crowd, a familiar figure appeared, the young woman who had crouched at the fence the day before. Her steps were careful, but her face bore no disguise. Determination traced her features now, tempered by something softer. She stopped near the man, her gaze slipping toward the gate. "He's protecting him," she said, her voice quieter, but no less certain. The murmurs deepened. Some scoffed, some fell silent in thought, others shifted uneasily. "Protecting him?" the man retorted. His arm gestured toward the gate. "That's not protection. That's hiding. That's it. Wrong." The shepherd's ears flicked at the edge in his tone. The man's words cut sharper than most. They carried a direction, a push toward action. But the woman did not yield. "You didn't see," she whispered, shaking her head. "I did." He stood between us, not like a wild thing. Like... Her words faltered, struggling to capture the shape of what she had felt in the shepherd's gaze. Like a guardian. The word lingered in the air. Guardian. The shepherd's eyes did not soften, but a faint shift pulsed in his chest at the sound. A word not of threat but of meaning. The debate grew. More voices joined, some sharp with fear, others shaded by pity, a few by quiet reverence. What had begun as whispers was now a public current. And currents once gathered, always sought direction. The baby, hearing the rise of sound, shifted closer to the shepherd's chest. His small hand gripped thick fur, his eyes wide and unknowing. He could not understand the battle outside the fence, the tide of strangers gathering, the weight of words pressing on his fragile existence. But he could feel it, and he felt the tension coiled in the shepherd's body. The heartbeat quickened, the breath sharpened, the stillness too taut. The child whimpered. The shepherd lowered his head, brushing his nose gently against the boy's hair, calming him with the familiar warmth of his breath. The murmurs outside wavered at the sound. A cry, not imagined, not fabricated, real. And realness was dangerous. A decision stirred. The man in front straightened, his posture stiff with resolve. He looked back at the crowd, drawing strength from the shifting tide of agreement. His voice rose louder. "We can't ignore this." The words rang clear, final. The crowd stirred. A few nodded. Others exchanged glances, heavy with unease. The woman's lips parted as though to protest, but no words came fast enough. The shepherd's stance hardened. His muscles coiled with silent warning. He knew that tone, the step beyond doubt, the threshold of intrusion. Then a new sound cut through the tension. Not the murmur of neighbors, not the cry of the child. A low hum, mechanical, approaching. The shepherd's ears snapped to it at once, the growl of an engine rolling closer. Tires pressed gravel. The hum deepened, then slowed, stopping near the crowd. A vehicle, authority. The murmurs shifted instantly, fragmenting into silence. Bodies turned, eyes widened. The man's stance faltered, his voice dying in his throat. The young woman stepped back, uncertainty chasing her conviction. The shepherd stayed rigid, eyes locked on the shadow of the vehicle beyond the fence. A door opened, closed, footsteps, measured, heavy. Not curious, intentional. The circle had tightened. The shepherd lowered his body slightly, placing himself closer over the child, his frame shielding him fully. His breath grew slow but sharp, every muscle honed for the moment that was coming. The crowd parted, creating a narrow path as the figure approached. Shoes struck against pavement in a steady rhythm. Then silence, a pause, a voice, calm, controlled, carried with the kind of authority that was not asked for, but expected. "Open the gate." The words were not shouted, they did not need to be. The crowd shifted, the weight of command pressing through them. Some leaned closer, straining to see. Others averted their eyes, uneasy in their own silence. The shepherd's growl finally broke free. Low, resonant, a sound that rolled through the boards like thunder through stone. The child whimpered again, clutching tighter at his protector's fur. The voice outside did not flinch, it repeated, steady, unshaken. "Open the gate." The shepherd's eyes glowed in the dim light, fixed and unwavering. His growl deepened, vibrating the ground beneath him. His body spoke the vow once more. Unbroken, unyielding. No hand, no voice. No command from beyond the fence would reach. The child. Not while breath still filled his chest, not while his vow still held, it was not shouted. Please do not modify it. It was spoken as though it were already fact, as though the wood and metal had no choice but to yield to the command. The crowd shifted uneasily at the weight of it. Whispers bled into silence. Shoes scuffed against pavement as bodies pressed back, reluctant to stand too near. Yet all eyes remained fixed on the gate, on the shadow just beyond it. The shepherd stood still, though every fibre of him trembled with readiness. His muscles were wire-drawn tight, his breath measured in slow defiance. The child's tiny fingers curled deeper into his fur, face pressed close, his whimpers fading into a fragile hush. The shepherd lowered his head, a growl building low in his chest. The sound was not meant for the crowd, it was meant for the voice, for the weight behind it. And still the voice did not waver. Open the gate. Then came the sound of metal, not the creak of hinges, but the subtle shift of weight against lock and latch. A hand pressed to the gate from outside, not pounding, not rattling, testing, measuring its strength. The shepherd lunged forward a single step. His body collided against the wood, a thunderous snarl. Ripping through the silence, the boards rattled. The hand pulled back instantly, the sound of shoes scraping the ground in retreat. The crowd gasped as one. Some stumbled back farther, others froze where they stood. The young woman who had spoken before clutched her arms tightly across her chest, her eyes fixed not on the shepherd, but on the child shielded beneath him. For the first time, a voice in the crowd rose not in challenge, but in protest. Don't open it. Can't. You see, it was the woman. Her voice cracked, but it carried. He's not hurting him. He's keeping him safe. A ripple passed through the watchers. Agreement, doubt, fear. It was hard to tell, but the certainty of the crowd had fractured. The shepherd did not look away from the gate. His growl remained, steady, a wall of sound that barred passage. Then the voice outside returned, but it was not the same as before. Not calm, not absolute, sharpened. Step aside. The weight of command shifted. It was no longer directed at the gate, but at the crowd, at those who stood in between. A new sound followed the shuffle of bodies, the creak of leather, the faint metallic ring of something carried. Authority had not come alone. The shepherd sensed it before any eyes confirmed it. More than one presence now, more than one shadow, moving beyond the boards. The crowd seemed to realize the same. Whispers broke into murmurs, murmurs into unease. Some pressed back farther, retreating toward the corners of the street. A few lingered near the gate, drawn by the magnetic pull of the moment. The young woman's voice rose again, desperate. Wait, please just wait. But authority does not wait. The latch rattled harder. The shepherd roared this time. Not a growl, not a snarl, an eruption. A sound so raw it shook through the boards. It cut through the crowd, it drove every whisper into silence. The child clung tighter, his small body trembling, but his cry did not rise. Somehow the roar shielded him as much as the shepherd's. Frame! The gate held, but the sound of footsteps shifted once more. Not retreat this time, no hesitation. Repositioning, measuring, looking for another way. The shepherd moved quickly, padding back from the gate, but never turning his back on it. His eyes swept the fence line, ears twitching. He knew the signs. Where one hand failed, another would try. Where one entry was blocked, another would be sought. The vow pressed heavier against him now. To protect was no longer to stand. It was to move, to anticipate, to become more than a barrier, becomes the ground itself, the shield that could not be bypassed. The child's tiny hand tugged his fur, as though sensing the urgency building in his protector's chest. The shepherd pressed his head low, brushing against the boy, steadying him before the storm broke. The crowd outside had grown restless. Voices now argued openly. "This is madness. There's a child in there. You can't just... He's dangerous. No, you don't understand." The words clashed, none finding dominance. The air thickened with the heat of division. Through it all, the voice of authority cut again, sharp and decisive. "If you won't open it, we will." The shepherd froze, his eyes narrowed, his body lowered, every muscle carved into readiness. And then the sound came. Not from the gate this time, from the side. Wood strained, hinges groaned. The fence itself was being tested. The shepherd spun, claws striking earth, body launching toward the pressure point. His roar erupted again, splitting the air. The wood quaked as he collided with it, his body slamming against the boards. The force on the other side withdrew instantly. Silence followed, broken only by the shepherd's growls. The crowd recoiled in shock. Some pressed their hands to their mouths, others staggered back. The young woman gripped the fence with white knuckles, whispering something no one else could hear. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, slowly, footsteps withdrew. Not in surrender, in strategy. The shepherd's ears tracked them, his body unmoving. He knew the sound of retreat that wasn't retreat. It was repositioned, reconsidering, planning. The child whimpered, exhausted by the storm of noise. His small body sagged against the shepherd's side, fighting the weight of sleep. Innocence battled fear, clinging desperately to the safety of the guardian's presence. The shepherd lowered himself onto the ground, curling slightly to cradle the boy in the hollow of his chest and forelegs. His growl faded, replaced by steady breath. But his eyes never left the fence, never left the shadows moving beyond. The vow burned brighter in him now than ever. They would not cross. They would not take it. Not while he remained. The crowd outside had thinned, but not dispersed. Too much had been seen. Too much had been stirred. They lingered at corners, peering through narrow gaps, whispering in anxious tones. And somewhere beyond them, authority still waited, still watched, not defeated, only delayed. The night would bring more. The shepherd knew it. The day had revealed. Too much, the child's cry, the crowd's division, the voice that spoke of gates and force. They would return, stronger, more certain. And when they did, the shepherd would not only need his strength, he would need more. But what more could a single guardian summon? The shepherd did not know, yet his vow did not falter. The child's breath warmed against his fur, soft and trusting. And in that fragile warmth, the shepherd found the answer not in words, not in strategy, but in the simple, undeniable truth. He could not fail. He would not fail. Not while the child still lived. Not while his vow still bound him. The sun sank. Behind jagged rooftops, stretching long shadows across the square. The gate, the fence, the silent onlookers all became muted outlines under the fading light. The air cooled, yet the weight of the day's standoff lingered like smoke after a fire. The shepherd did not move from his post, his body curved protectively around the child, his fur a shield against the encroaching chill. The boy's breathing had steadied into shallow sleep, though his small fingers remained entangled in the shepherd's coat, as though even in dreams he refused to let go. But the shepherd's eyes did not close. They burned in the darkness. The crowd that had filled the square did not disperse entirely. Many slipped away when the sun fell, eager to escape the unease that clung to the place, but some lingered. Too curious to leave, too invested to look away. They gathered in tight clusters along the street, their murmurs softened but not silenced by the night. And in the distance, authority still waited. No footsteps near the fence, no hands on the gate, not yet. But the shepherd knew. Night was their ally. Shadows made tools of men, covering intent, concealing approaches. When the eyes of the crowd grew weary, when their watch dimmed, that was when the strike would come. The shepherd's muscles remained taut, his ears tuned to every shifting whisper, every scrape of boot against stone. The vow echoed inside him, louder than the voices outside. He would not yield. The first test came not long after twilight had settled. A flicker of movement against the far corner of the fence is subtle, almost unseen. A hand, then another. Quiet as spiders, crawling upward along the boards. The shepherd was on his feet before the crowd noticed. His growl rolled low across the ground, vibrating through the wood. The hands froze. For a heartbeat, silence hung. Then, with startling swiftness, the shepherd lunged. His body collided against the boards, teeth snapping through the narrow gap. A cry broke out sharp, pained. The hands withdrew at once, retreating into the darkness. The crowd gasped. Some shouted warnings, others whispered prayers. A few began to step back farther. Realizing the night would not pass in peace, the shepherd stood tall again, chest heaving, eyes narrowed on the place where the hands had vanished. His growl lingered, a rumbling promise that no breach would be allowed. The boy stirred at the noise, eyes fluttering open. He whimpered softly, clutching tighter to the shepherd's fur. The guardian bent low, pressing his head against the child's. The growl faded into steady breath, a rhythm to calm the trembling body. Sleep reclaimed the boy, but the night storm had only begun. The second test was not of wood, but of silence. The shepherd's ears pricked at the faint scrape of stone against stone, a sound behind the house, not at the gate or fence, a new path being sought. He shifted his body, nudging the child gently toward the shadow of the wall, away from the open yard. Then he stalked the line of the fence, head low, every step measured. The crowd could not see what he sensed. They murmured, nervously, confused by his sudden movements. Then the sound came again, clearer this time. The subtle drag of something being placed against the boards. A ladder. The shepherd charged. His roar split the air, fierce and unyielding. The boards rattled with the force of his strike. The scraping ceased at once. Shadows shifted frantically on the far side. Then the ladder toppled, clattering against the earth. Gasps erupted from the crowd. The shepherd paced along the fence line, his body blocking every angle, his voice a thunder that warned of blood if another attempt came. For the moment silence returned, but the silence was not safe. It was plotting. The third test was the boldest, the gate itself. The latch quivered as unseen hands tried to lift it in the cover of night. Not rattling, not testing, lifting, deliberate, controlled. The shepherd flung himself forward with a roar that cracked the stillness. His body slammed against the wood, teeth snapping inches from the gap. The latch dropped instantly. Footsteps fled into the darkness. But this time the crowd reacted differently. Where fear had filled them before, something else sparked admiration, belief. They had seen him defend not once, not twice, but 3 times. And each time the child remained untouched. The whispers grew. Not all were kind, but none could deny the truth that had unfolded before them. The shepherd was not the threat. He was the shield. Hours stretched long. The moon climbed, higher, casting silver light across the square. The attempts grew less frequent, as though the shadows beyond weighed their losses against the strength of the guardian. But the shepherd did not ease. He paced the yard like a sentinel, circling the child, pausing only to rest his head against the boy when his dreams turned restless. His eyes burned bright, never dimming. The vow was carved deeper with every passing moment. He could not fail. He would not fail. The crowd dwindled further as night deepened. Only the most stubborn remained, those too afraid to leave or too transfixed to turn away. The young woman still stood near the fence, her face pale but her eyes steady. Once, when the shepherd paused near her, their gazes met through the narrow gaps in the wood. She whispered, though her voice trembled, "Hold fast, whatever you are." The shepherd did not understand her words, but he understood her tone. For the first time it carried no fear, it carried respect, and so the night dragged on, marked by tests and silence, by growls and fleeting footsteps. The assaults weakened, not in intent but in frequency, as if the darkness itself grew weary of clashing against the shepherd's vow. Yet, in the hush that followed, a different tension grew. Not of force, of waiting. The shepherd sensed it. The crowd felt it. They had not given up. They were gathering strength. When dawn came, it would not be with hands and ladders. It would be with more. The boy stirred once more, whimpering softly. The shepherd lowered himself onto the ground, wrapping his body around the child. His heartbeat became the boy's lullaby, steady and strong. But his eyes did not close. Not once. The night might pause, the voices might quiet, but the vow could never sleep. The night had pressed its weight upon us like a verdict, and by the time the first grey fingers of dawn pried open the horizon, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The German shepherd had not moved from his place at the child's side, though his body trembled with exhaustion, and his fur bore the marks of mud and rain. His eyes were fixed forward, sharp, unwavering, carrying a determination that no human voice could have articulated. I remember standing there, half leaning, against the broken porch railing, my hands shaking around the folds of the boy's thin blanket. I had meant to place it back over him, but the shepherd had already done what I could not. He had made himself a wall, a warmth, a heartbeat that kept the child steady through the dark hours. But with dawn came the inevitable. From down the gravel road, the sound of tires grinding over loose stone broke the silence. At first it was a distant hum, then growing louder, it became the low growl of something final, something official. A truck pulled into view, white, unmarked, its headlights still glowing against the dim blue of morning. Behind it a second vehicle followed. The shepherd's ears twitched. He did not rise at once. Instead, he lowered his head slightly as if pressing his forehead closer to the child's small shoulder. His breath came out in a steady, slow rhythm, like he was giving the boy his calmness, even as the world shifted again. The trucks rolled to a stop, doors opened, boots crunched against gravel. Voices carried clipped, firm, belonging to people who had long ago learned how to deliver decisions without pause. One man stepped forward first. His uniform was plain, his jacket zipped high against the chill. His eyes did not seek me at. Once they sought the shepherd, and when they found him, his jaw tightened as though confirming what had been described in some call, some report. "There," he muttered to the others. The shepherd rose then, not with aggression, not with a snarl, but with a weary grace that only deepened the gravity of the moment. His body straightened, and though his legs wavered from the strain of the long night, he positioned himself squarely before the boy, blocking any path forward. His gaze locked onto the strangers with an authority that needed no translation. I wanted to speak, to tell them what I had seen, the rain, the blanket, the small hand clutching the shepherd's fur as if it were the only anchor in a dissolving world. But my throat caught. The weight of years of silence pressed against me, and I could not find my voice. The officials approached slowly, their footsteps deliberate, their expressions unreadable. One carried a looped leash, its metal clasp catching the dim light. Another held a clipboard, pen poised as if already preparing the final lines of a story. Neither of them had lived. The boy stirred. A soft whimper escaped him as he shifted against the shepherd's flank. That sound, fragile, human, unbearably tender, cracked something in me. I took a step forward, the blanket clutched so tightly in my fists that my knuckles burned. "He's not dangerous," I managed to whisper, though the words felt small against the vastness of the morning. "Please don't see him as dangerous." The shepherd did not move except to adjust his weight, spreading his paws wider, lowering his chest as though he could sink his very body into the earth to make himself immovable. His eyes glimmered in the thin light, not wild, not panicked, simply resolved. One of the men stopped a few yards away. He looked at the boy, then at me. His expression faltered for only a heartbeat before he schooled it again. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "we need to separate the animal. For everyone's safety." Safety. The word twisted in my chest like a knife. I looked at the shepherd, at the way the boy's small fingers had curled instinctively into his fur even in half-sleep. How could they not see? How could they not understand that safety was already here, embodied in muscle, breath, and the unwavering bond of this creature, who had given all that remained of himself for the child? The shepherd let out a low sound, then not a growl but something deeper, older. It was the sound of a vow, the rumble of an oath carried in his chest. It stilled the air, even stopped the men for the span of a moment. The boy shifted again, as if comforted by the vibration. I stepped forward once more, this time planting myself beside them. My voice was still fragile, but it carried more weight. "If you take him away," I said, my eyes fixed on the man with the leash, "you take away the only thing keeping that child whole." The silence that followed was not empty. It brimmed with tension, with the unspoken recognition that lines had been drawn not by aggression, but by loyalty, by a bond that no authority had the right to sever. The second man, the one with the clipboard, scribbled something down. His eyes did not meet mine, nor the shepherd's. He was already writing this scene into a ledger, reducing it to data, procedure. But the first man, the one who had muttered, there when he saw the shepherd, lingered. His gaze softened almost imperceptibly, betraying some private conflict. His lips parted, but no words came. Instead, he looked back at his colleagues, as though seeking silent instruction. The shepherd did not yield. His body trembled with fatigue, but he stood, breath steaming in the cool dawn, his entire being pressed into the simple, undeniable truth. The boy is mine to protect. I realized then that this was the moment everything balanced upon, not the long nights of rain, not the whispered fears of neighbors, not the scars that marked the shepherd's body. This was the crucible, the test that would either confirm or erase the fragile sanctuary carved out in the silence of the night. The baby stirred again, a small cry bubbling up, and I bent quickly, draping the blanket around him. My hand brushed the shepherd's fur as I did, and I felt the warmth there, the pulse, the stubborn, desperate strength. He leaned ever so slightly, into my touch, just enough to remind me. We were not separate. His vow was mine too. Behind us, the sky continued to lighten. The clouds split just enough to let through a shaft of pale light that fell across the shepherd's shoulders, glinting. Against his worn coat, it was not brilliance, not some divine sign, only the indifferent glow of a new day. Yet in that moment it felt like a witness. The men conferred quietly. Their voices carried but not their words. Every second stretched, every breath a question, hanging in the air. I held mine. The shepherd waited. The child slept again, unaware of the battle being fought in silence over his small form. And then footsteps, a decision, a shift that would bleed into the next moment, changing everything that followed. The air was taut with silence, stretched so thin that even the smallest sound seemed to cut through it. The men had stepped back into a loose semicircle, their whispered conference fading as quickly as it had begun. And yet I felt no release. My chest ached with the weight of every unspoken plea, every truth I wanted to force into their ears. He is not dangerous. He is salvation. Don't you see what he has already done? But the shepherd spoke louder than I ever could. He stood there planted firmly before the boy, as though the earth itself had agreed to hold his paws steady. His chest rose and fell in quiet, even rhythm. His eyes locked on the strangers with unflinching certainty. His body trembled, yes, but it was not weakness. It was endurance stretched beyond the limits of flesh, powered by something stronger than instinct. Choice. The man with the leash shifted his weight. He gripped the loop tightly in one hand, the clasp swinging lightly, catching the pale morning light. He took one step forward. The shepherd did not move. Another step. Still the shepherd held, his head lowering slightly, his muscles coiling not for attack, but for defiance, for the unspoken promise, "You will go through me." I felt the boy stir against my side, a soft whimper breaking from his lips. His hand reached instinctively for the shepherd's fur, fingers curling as though even in half-consciousness he knew what anchor kept him tethered to the world. Wait. The word tore itself from me before I even knew I had spoken. It cracked the silence, small yet sharp, like a stone dropped into still water. The men paused. Their eyes flicked toward me, expectant, unreadable. My breath shook. My knees felt weak. But I forced myself forward, just enough to stand shoulder to shoulder with the shepherd. My hand found his fur damp, tangled, warm with a living heat that steadied me. "You don't see it," I whispered, "because you haven't been here. You didn't hear the storm. You didn't see him stand guard through the night. You didn't see this child cling to him as if his heartbeat was the only one left in the world." The man with the leash frowned, his jaw tightening. "Ma'am, I understand what you know," I cut in, my voice gaining a fragile strength. "You don't. If you did, You wouldn't be standing there holding that leash like it was justice. The shepherd let out a sound, then not quite a growl, not quite a sigh. It rumbled through his chest, low and steady, resonating into the boy's small frame. The child quieted, his breath smoothing out again, his tiny fingers still tangled in fur. The man faltered. His hand slackened on the leash. For just a moment something flickered across his face. Doubt, maybe, or memory. He glanced at the boy, at the way the shepherd leaned just enough to shield him, then back at his colleagues. The one with the clipboard shifted impatiently. His pen scratched once more across the page, as though the scene could be reduced to nothing more than ink and regulation. He spoke without looking up. The procedure is clear. The animal must be contained. Contained! The words scraped against my ears. The shepherd didn't flinch. He only pressed his weight more firmly into the earth, as though he had been born for this single stance. And in that moment I realized something. The officials might have carried rules, papers, and leashes, but the shepherd carried truth. And truth is heavier than law. The man with the leash lowered his hand slightly. His voice was quieter now. And if he won't let go? No one answered. The pause stretched. The sun had begun its slow climb, brushing gold across the broken porch, across the shepherd's coat. His fur caught the light in strands, dull from exhaustion, but still carrying that stubborn gleam. He turned his head slightly, just enough to meet my eyes. And in that silent glance I understood. He was asking nothing, demanding nothing. He was simply holding his line, trusting that I would see what he had already chosen. There would be no surrender, not from him, not for the boy. The officials shifted again. Time seemed to bend every second heavier than the last. Then the first man exhaled, long and slow. His shoulders sagged as though some unseen weight pressed upon him. He closed the loop of the leash in his hand, tucking it back against his belt. His voice, when it came, was rougher than before. Maybe it doesn't have to be today. The words struck me like the sudden breaking of a storm. Relief and disbelief tangled inside me, so sharp it almost hurt. I felt my throat tighten, my vision blur. The shepherd did not move, not at first. He watched the man carefully, his stance unbroken. Only when the truck doors opened again, only when the boots began to retreat across the gravel, did he shift his weight. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he lowered himself back down beside the boy, curling in close once more. The officials climbed, back into their vehicles. Engines rumbled to life, gravel sprayed faintly as wheels turned. The second truck pulled away first, then the first followed. Dust rose in their wake, curling into the pale morning air. And then silence. No orders, no footsteps, no leashes. Just the slow, even breathing of the boy, the steady thrum of the shepherd's chest, and my own trembling heartbeat, trying to steady itself. I sank down onto the porch beside them, my hands shaking as I reached for the boy's blanket and pulled it tighter around him. My fingers brushed against the shepherd's fur. He leaned into me faintly, his body heavy, his exhaustion undeniable. Yet still his eyes stayed open, fixed outward, guarding, promising. The boy shifted again, a soft sigh escaping him, and his small hand remained tangled in the shepherd's fur. His trust was complete, unbroken, absolute. And in that moment, I realized something I had not let myself believe until now. We were not just witnesses to his vow. We were part of it. His strength had become ours, his defiance our shield, his endurance our chance. The shepherd closed his eyes briefly then, just for a heartbeat, as if giving himself permission to rest. But even in rest, his body remained, poised, pressed to the boy's side, listening for the world beyond. I looked out across the fields, where the sun now climbed higher, washing the land in light. The storm was gone. The night had passed. But the truth remained, steady as the dog lying beside us. Safety had not arrived in trucks or uniforms. It had been here all along, carried in fur, in loyalty, in the silent, unyielding love of a creature who had chosen to stand when no one else would. The shepherd breathed, slow and steady. The boy slept, fingers curled tight. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I allowed myself to believe maybe that was enough.